The night her stepmother told her, "No one's coming for you," Laila didn't cry, because deep down, she already knew it was true. The first time Laila heard those words, they didn't strike her as something permanent. They didn't feel like a sentence that would follow her through every waking moment. They sounded almost ordinary, spoken without emotion, as if they carried no weight at all. "No one's coming for you?" her stepmother had said while turning away, as if Layla's existence didn't deserve more than a passing remark. And Laila had stood there quietly, holding onto the edge of her worn dress, unsure of how to react, unsure whether those words were meant to hurt or simply meant to remind her of something she had not yet fully understood. But over time, she realized they were not just words. They were a belief her stepmother intended to carve into her life, something meant to keep her small, silent, and obedient. Life had not always been like this. There had been a time when her father was alive, when the house held warmth, when laughter existed even if only in small moments. But illness had slowly taken him away, turning him into a man who could barely speak, barely stand. And by the time he was gone, everything that had once made that house feel like a home had disappeared with him, leaving behind emptiness that was quickly filled by her stepmother's cold authority. And Laila, still too young to understand the full weight of loss, found herself trapped in a life she had no control over. Not long after a child was born, her little brother, so small and fragile that it felt as if even the air around him needed to be handled carefully. But instead of bringing softness into the house, his arrival seemed to deepen the bitterness that already lived there, because her stepmother never accepted him, never treated him as her own, and from the very beginning, she made it clear that the child was not her responsibility, that he was nothing more than an inconvenience she refused to carry. And without needing to say it directly, she placed that entire burden onto Laila, who had barely grown out of childhood herself. From that day forward, Layla's life changed completely. Mornings began before the sky even started to lighten, her body moving out of habit rather than rest, one hand trying to prepare the simplest meal while the other held her baby brother close, wrapped in cloth, pressed gently against her chest, as if she could shield him from everything the world might throw at him. And in a way, she was trying to do exactly that. Because in a house where kindness had no place, she became the only source of comfort he had. Whenever the baby cried, her stepmother's voice would cut through the walls with sharp irritation, ordering Laila to take him away, to silence him, to not let his noise disturb the house, as if his cries were something unnatural, something unacceptable, and Laila would rush to calm him, rocking him gently, whispering soft words, even when her own strength was fading, sometimes going without food so that whatever little there was could be saved for him, doing whatever she could, however small, because in her mind, his survival mattered more than her own comfort. Days passed without meaning, blending into each other in a quiet, exhausting routine, and Layla's world became smaller with each passing moment, reduced to endless work and silent endurance. There was no room left for her own dreams, no time to think about what she wanted, because everything she was had been reshaped into what she needed to be for someone else. Yet even in that life, something inside her refused to disappear completely, something quiet and steady, growing slowly beneath the surface, like roots pushing deeper into the earth, unseen but strong. The villagers noticed her. They saw the way she carried both water and a child, the way her small frame struggled under responsibilities that were never meant for her. They whispered among themselves, sometimes offering small acts of kindness, a piece of bread, an old cloth, a brief moment of sympathy. But no one stepped forward to truly change her situation. No one challenged the life she was forced to live, and Laila, having learned not to expect much from anyone, accepted those moments quietly without letting hope take hold. Because hope, she knew, could hurt more than reality when it disappeared. Still, every time she looked down at her baby brother, saw his tiny fingers curl around hers, felt the warmth of his small body against her chest, something inside her softened and strengthened at the same time, and she made silent promises to him, promises she never spoke out loud, that no matter what happened, he would never feel alone, even if she had to carry both their lives forward by herself. One afternoon, she was sent farther than usual to fetch water, the journey longer, the path rougher, and by the time she reached the outer edge of the village, her body ached with exhaustion. But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. because returning late would bring anger she wasn't prepared to face. So she adjusted the cloth around the baby, making sure he was protected from the dry air, and kept walking step by step, even as her strength felt like it was slipping away. When she reached a bend in the road where an old wooden signboard stood, pointing toward distant places she had never seen, she paused for a moment, just long enough to catch her breath, gently rocking the baby to keep him calm. And in that brief stillness, she heard something approaching. The sound of hooves against dry ground, steady and controlled, different from anything she was used to hearing. As the figure came into view, she saw a man on horseback, but there was something about him that immediately stood out. Something in the way he carried himself, calm yet strong, as if he belonged to a different world entirely. And instinctively, Laila lowered her gaze, tightening her hold on the baby, preparing to pass by unnoticed as she always did. But this time, things didn't happen the way they usually did. The man slowed down, then stopped completely, as if something about her had caught his attention, and when he stepped down from his horse and lowered himself onto one knee in front of her, his movement wasn't threatening, it wasn't forceful, it was careful, deliberate, as if he didn't want to frighten her. And when he spoke, his voice was steady, carrying a quiet concern that felt unfamiliar. "Are you all right?" For a moment, Laila didn't know how to respond, because it had been so long since anyone had asked her that, not out of duty, not out of habit, but with what sounded like genuine care, and her instinct told her to nod and move on, to avoid conversation, to avoid attention, yet something in his tone made her pause, and she gave a small, quiet nod, even though her tired eyes told a different story. His gaze shifted to the baby in her arms, noticing how small he was, how carefully she held him, and he asked softly, "Is he yours?" And Laila shook her head before replying in a low voice, "He's my brother." And in those few words, there was more truth than any explanation could hold. A silence followed, but it wasn't heavy. It wasn't filled with judgment. It was something else entirely, something steady, something that made Laila feel, for the first time in a long while, that she wasn't completely invisible, that someone was looking at her not as a burden, not as a problem, but as a person. And even though nothing had changed yet, not really. Something inside her shifted, just slightly, just enough to matter, but she couldn't stay there. She couldn't allow herself to linger in a moment that didn't belong to her life. So she adjusted her hold on the baby and slowly stood up, preparing to continue her journey back, because no matter how difficult her home was, it was still where she was expected to return, and delay would only bring consequences she couldn't avoid. The man didn't stop her, didn't question her further, but as she turned to leave, he spoke again, his voice carrying a quiet weight that stayed with her even after she walked away. "If you ever need help," he began, but he didn't finish the sentence. Perhaps because he understood that someone like her wouldn't easily ask for it. Perhaps because he knew that help wasn't something she had ever been taught to expect. And as Laila walked away from that place, her step still heavy but her grip on her brother steady, she carried something new with her, something small but undeniable, like a faint light breaking through darkness, not strong enough to change everything, not yet, but enough to remind her that maybe, just maybe, the world was not entirely as closed off as she had been made to believe. And behind her, the rancher remained still for a moment longer, watching her disappear down the road, as if he already knew that this meeting was not the end of something, but the beginning. After that day at the crossroads, nothing changed, and yet everything felt different in a way Laila could not explain, as if something invisible had shifted inside her, something small but steady, like a quiet voice she had never heard before. And even though her routine remained the same, her stepmother's sharp words still filled the house. Her responsibilities still weighed heavily on her shoulders. She no longer felt completely trapped inside that life, because now there was a memory she carried with her, a moment where someone had looked at her and seen more than just a burden. But reality did not loosen its grip easily, and the very next evening, her stepmother's anger rose higher than usual, triggered by something small, something that should not have mattered. Yet in that house, even the smallest mistake became an excuse for cruelty. And this time, it was the baby's crying that set everything off. His soft cries turning into loud wails as hunger and discomfort overwhelmed him. And instead of understanding, instead of patience, there was only irritation, only blame. and her stepmother's voice cut through the air with a sharpness that made Laila freeze where she stood. "I told you to keep him quiet," she shouted, her anger spilling over without restraint. And before Laila could even respond, more words followed, harsher, heavier. "If you can't handle him, then take him and leave. I don't want either of you here." And for a moment, time seemed to stop, because those words were no longer just threats. They felt real, final, like a door being slammed shut with no intention of ever opening again. Laila didn't argue, didn't cry out, didn't beg, because somewhere deep inside, she had already heard something similar before, in a different form, in a quieter voice. No one's coming for you. And now, standing there with her baby brother in her arms, she realized something that felt both frightening and freeing at the same time. Maybe no one was coming. Maybe no miracle would arrive to change her life. But that didn't mean she had to stay where she wasn't wanted. That night, when the house finally fell silent, Laila sat awake, her brother sleeping against her chest, his small breath steady and warm, and she looked around at the space that had never truly felt like home, at the walls that had witnessed her silence, her endurance, her quiet suffering. And for the first time, she didn't feel attached to it. She didn't feel like she belonged there anymore. And slowly, without making a sound, she stood up. She didn't take much with her, because there wasn't much to take. Just a piece of cloth to wrap the baby more securely, a small bundle of whatever food she could find, and the strength she had built inside herself over time. And as she stepped outside, the night air felt different. Not kinder, not easier, but open, like something waiting for her to move forward. The road was quiet. The same road she had walked countless times before, but this time it wasn't leading her back. It was leading her away, and each step she took felt uncertain yet steady. Because even though she didn't know where she was going, she knew she could not stay where she had been. And that alone was enough to keep her moving. By the time the first light of morning began to touch the horizon, she found herself near that same crossroads, the old signboard still standing, pointing toward places she had never seen. And for a moment, she stopped, not out of fear, but out of awareness, because this place no longer felt like just a part of her routine. It felt like a turning point. Her brother stirred in her arms, letting out a soft cry, and she held him closer, whispering gently to calm him, even as her own heart beat faster, unsure of what would come next. And then, as if drawn by something unseen, she heard it again, the sound of hooves against the ground. Steady, familiar, and when she looked up, she saw him. The rancher slowed as soon as he recognized her, his expression shifting from calm to something more serious, more aware, and when he reached her, he didn't stay on his horse this time. He stepped down immediately, his attention going straight to the child in her arms, then back to her face, reading what she hadn't said out loud. "You didn't go back," he said quietly, not as a question, but as a realization, and Laila shook her head, her voice soft but firm when she finally spoke. "We can't go back." And in those simple words, there was no hesitation, no uncertainty, just truth. For a moment, he didn't respond. Not because he didn't understand, but because he was choosing his next words carefully, and then he spoke in the same steady tone. "Then don't." And it wasn't said as a command. It wasn't said as a dramatic promise. It was simple, direct, and real, like an option she had never been given before. He didn't offer false comfort, didn't pretend that things would suddenly become easy. Instead, he offered something more meaningful. "There's work at my ranch," he said. "It's not easy, but it's honest. And you'll have a place to stay." And he paused briefly before adding, "You and the boy?" Making it clear that his offer wasn't just for her, but for the life she carried with her. Laila didn't answer immediately, not because she doubted him, but because she understood the weight of what he was offering. This wasn't just help. It was a chance, a way forward, something she had never truly had before. And after a moment, she nodded, not dramatically, not with relief or excitement, but with quiet acceptance, the kind that comes when someone has already made their decision long before the moment arrives. The journey to the ranch wasn't long, but it felt different from anything she had experienced before, not because the path had changed, but because she had. And when they arrived, the place was simple, open, filled with the kind of life that required effort, but also gave something back in return. And for the first time in a long while, Laila felt like she was stepping into something new rather than returning to, something that drained her. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, her life began to take a different shape. The work was still hard, the responsibilities still real, but they were no longer forced upon her with cruelty. They were shared, understood, and respected. And her brother grew stronger, healthier, no longer just surviving, but living, and Laila, without even realizing it, began to stand a little straighter, speak a little more, exist a little more freely. Sometimes, in quiet moments, she would remember those words her stepmother had said, the ones that once felt like a sentence she could never escape. No one's coming for you. And now they sounded different. Not like a warning, not like a truth meant to trap her, but like something she had outgrown, something that no longer defined her. Because in the end, her stepmother had been right in one way. No one had come to rescue her. No miracle had appeared to carry her away. But she had been wrong in the way that mattered most. Because Laila had not needed someone to come for her, she had needed the strength to move forward herself. And when the moment came, she took it. And as she stood one evening, watching the open land stretch beyond the ranch, her brother resting safely in her arms, she whispered softly, not to anyone else but to herself, "You were right. No one came for me." And then after a pause, her voice steadier, stronger, "But I didn't need them to. Sometimes no one comes to save you, because you were never meant to be rescued. You were meant to rise. Like this video if you felt it. Comment where you're watching from, and share this story with someone who needs to hear it.